John Money, was a tyrant. John Money says, we're going to remove his testicles and raise him as a girl. But what happened is that during all those years, Dr. Money was those twins. Oh no, it was a disaster, terrible disaster. John Money introduced the idea of gender identity. He coined the term gender identity. And he said that the gender identity is completely separate from biology, and that it is one's identity as male or female, because back then, of course, we didn't have the non-binary and in between, all that, 47 different genders stuff. So in the 50s, when John Money was writing and speaking about all this, he had his theory, and he didn't have any way of proving it until this family showed up at his doorstep. And it was a Canadian family from Winnipeg, I think, right? And they were the Reimer family, a blue-collar, very young couple. And they had a horrific tragedy in their family, which is that they gave birth to twin boys. The boys were fine. Well, actually, they had phimosis. And so the doctors recommended circumcision for the boys. And they went in when they were 8 months old for circumcision. And the first boy to go in for the circumcision was Bruce. And there was a malfunction of the equipment. And they were cauterizing the penis in order to circumcise it. And instead of just that small amount of tissue that was supposed to be cauterized, apparently the settings were incorrect and the entire penis was burnt. The other boy was not circumcised. So they went home, and what are they supposed to do? They have a boy without a penis. What the hell are they supposed to do? So months later, they were watching television, and John Money happened to be on there. And you have to know also that John Money was an extremely pompous, self-assured individual. He was sophisticated. He came across as being definitive, calling the shots, knowing what was going on, knowing the research, knowing the truth. And he said that a boy can be raised as a girl and a girl can be raised as a boy if it's done early enough. And that early enough means before the age of 2.5 or 3. And the Reimer parents immediately took note of that, and they thought, here's the answer. So they contacted Dr. Money in Baltimore, and they made an appointment and took the twins down to Baltimore and went down there. Again, you have to understand that this was a uneducated, young blue-collar family. And when they were interviewed later about their meetings with John Money, they described him as like, we just thought he was God. I mean, he's a professor, and he's, got all the diplomas, and he's the head of this entire clinic at an outstanding university, one of the major universities in the world.
That was at Johns Hopkins, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So you have to imagine this young couple coming, and they're at a loss, and they are looking for an answer. And John Money says, well, we have an answer for you, because male and female is actually not related to chromosomes. It's not related to hormones. It's not innate. We can take little Bruce, and we have to do some surgery on Bruce. We have to castrate him, and we'll remove his testicles. He already didn't have a penis. We're going to fashion, some sort of elementary sort of female genitalia. You're going to give him a girl's name, and you're going to put him in pink dresses and give him dolls and raise him as a girl. And you are never, ever, Dr. Money told the parents, never to tell him that this was truly what happened, because that will ruin everything. And it's up to you. You have to just work your hardest to raise him as a girl and make sure that everyone around him is considering him a girl, because essentially he is a girl. And so not only was this the answer to the Reimer's prayers, this was, as you can understand now, the answer to Dr. Money's prayers.
Right. He had an experiment.
This was the experiment. This was his proof of concept. His concept was that being male and female is completely separate from biology. It's imposed by society. It's a social construct. And this was his proof of concept. So they took him home, raised him as a girl, and Dr. Money started to follow the twins. Every year they would come down for a visit. And so Dr. Money would take the twins without the parents into his office and spend time with the twins. So this went on for years, and Dr. Money began to report on his study that became a famous landmark study. He called her Joan in his study. He was beginning to write about this and lecture, and he was claiming that Joan, AKA Brenda, AKA Bruce, was doing great. And he was giving this glowing report from year to year, and he was giving talks, and he was getting, you might imagine, tremendous attention for this. I mean, you have to understand, this was by now, the early 60s. This is feminism. This is the sexual revolution. This is a time when society, or at least part of society, wanted nothing more to say that male and female is a social construct. And that in order to gain full equality, women have to be considered the same as men. Now, what happened is that this theory of John Money's was accepted over the decades. We didn't find out what really happened with the twins until decades later. But what happened is that we discovered that he stood up and he said he just blew the cover of this whole thing was a hoax. And his name was now David. Brenda had become David. And he was not only a man, but he was married to a woman, and he had adopted 3 stepchildren, and he worked as a janitor in a slaughterhouse.
Right.
So that was David Reimer, and people can go onto YouTube and hear him being interviewed about his experience of what it was like to be told for 14 years of his life that he's a girl, and to never, ever feel that was his truth. And what happened is that during all those years, he was not happy with his dresses and with his dolls. He wanted to go play with his brother's toys. He wanted to pee standing up. He was so boyish that kids called him Cave Woman. Okay, they made fun of him because the way that he walked and his gestures and his interests were all so masculine. And he was a miserable child, and the family was miserable. And on top of everything, when the family was going back for those yearly visits to Johns Hopkins with Dr. Money was those twins.
Okay, how?
He was forcing them and to mimic, and he would say, this is what men and women do together, and he would, humiliate them and show them pictures. And the point came, why did they stop going down to Johns Hopkins? The boys refused to go. They refused to go back to see Dr. Money, and the parents couldn't understand why.
What happened? Did David Reimer committed suicide eventually, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes. So that's the denouement of that particularly tragic case.
And his twin.
So not only was this a failure, it was a...
Oh, no. It was a disaster, terrible disaster. He committed suicide, and his twin brother died of an opiate overdose. His twin died first. The entire family was... what kind of words? Traumatized. It's not enough. Trauma is not enough to describe what that family went through.
So what we should point out here is that this experiment couldn't possibly have gone more cataclysmically wrong than it did. Not only was what Money was saying was not true in the technical scientific sense, it was an anti-truth, and he falsified the data, and it culminated in the death of 2 people, the demolition of a family, and the perversion of an entire culture.
He never publicly acknowledged it. John Money died, I think, in 2006, and I think he had dementia. But when John Colapinto's book came out that just like exposed this whole calamity, there was nothing from John Money. He was still alive. He could have made a statement. Nothing. I'm just saying that that's just another indication of what the immorality of this person and the lack of acknowledgement of what they're guilty of doing. I mean, I guess it's too much to expect.